What if the story you were told was never the full story? Not half true, not twisted, just incomplete. Because according to explosive new allegations circulating right now, the biggest secret surrounding Meghan Markle's children may not be about where they were born, how they were raised, or why they've been kept so carefully out of the spotlight. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It may be about who their real father is. Let that sink in for a second. For years, the public narrative has been airtight. A fairy tale romance. A royal wedding watched by millions. Two children presented to the world as symbols of a modern monarchy. But behind the polished photos and carefully worded statements, insiders now claim there was a period the cameras didn't capture. A quiet stretch of time. A separation no one was supposed to notice. And according to these allegations, everything changed there. Here's the part that should make you uneasy. This story didn't begin with tabloids. It didn't start with a scandal headline or a leaked voicemail. It allegedly began in private, behind closed doors, with conversations that were never meant to leave the room, and a DNA test that was never meant to be discussed at all. Ask yourself this. If nothing was wrong, why would a test even exist? Supporters say this is all noise. That rumors follow powerful women no matter what they do. Critics argue the opposite, that silence has been carefully engineered, not accidental. Two sides, no clear answers, and a growing number of people asking the same question in hushed tones. Why now? Why, after years of control, are these whispers resurfacing with such urgency? Why are former friends suddenly distancing themselves? Why are online traces being scrubbed instead of addressed? Timing matters in stories like this, and the timing couldn't be worse. Because according to multiple sources, the alleged confession didn't come during a public interview. It didn't happen on camera. It came during a private moment when emotions were already stretched thin, a moment when the truth, or at least one version of it, couldn't be rehearsed. Think about the weight of that. Imagine carrying a secret so volatile that revealing it could rewrite your children's identities forever. Imagine knowing that one decision, made during a fragile period, could unravel everything you've built since. Would you tell the world? Or would you try to control the narrative before the narrative controls you? This isn't just gossip. If even part of these claims were true, they wouldn't just challenge public perception. They would shake trust, fracture relationships, and force uncomfortable questions about power, privacy, and who really gets to decide the truth. And here's the most disturbing part of all. According to insiders, the truth didn't surface in public first. It surfaced in a private room, with a test result no one could unsee. And what happened immediately after that is where this story truly begins. There's always a gap in stories like this. A small window of time everyone skips over because it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or doesn't fit the version we prefer to believe. And according to multiple accounts now resurfacing, this story has one of those gaps too. A narrow stretch, quiet, almost invisible, but heavy with consequences. Here's the question no one wants to ask out loud. If everything was stable, why was there distance at all? Publicly, appearances continued. Smiles, carefully framed photos, appearances that suggested unity. But insiders describe something very different behind the scenes. Missed calls, separate schedules, long stretches of emotional detachment that were explained away as stress, work, or pressure from the spotlight. Sound familiar? That's how separations often look when they're not meant to be noticed. According to the allegations, there was a period when the relationship existed more in name than in reality. No official announcement, no dramatic split, just a slow drift that only people inside the circle could feel. And it was during this time, sources claim, that boundaries blurred in ways no one anticipated. Here's the contradiction that keeps resurfacing. Supporters insist there was never a true separation. Critics say the absence of clarity is the point. Because in high-profile relationships, separation doesn't always mean moving out. Sometimes it means emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it means living parallel lives under the same public roof. Ask yourself this. How would you define separation if admitting it would trigger global backlash? This is where the story shifts from speculation to tension. Because according to those close to the situation, this period wasn't just emotionally complicated. It was legally undefined. No paperwork, no public acknowledgement, just a gray area that created space for decisions that would later become impossible to undo. And in that gray area, one alleged relationship took on a significance no one expected. Not a random stranger, not a brief encounter, but someone already trusted, someone already inside the orbit, someone whose presence wouldn't raise alarms, at least not at first. There's irony here. The very discretion meant to protect the family may have created the conditions for the most destabilizing secret of all. Think about the pressure. Living under constant surveillance. Being expected to perform stability even when it no longer exists. It's not hard to imagine how silence becomes easier than truth. But silence has a cost. Because according to multiple whispers, what began as an unspoken separation soon collided with something tangible, something measurable, something scientific. And once that happened, there was no going back. Because the next chapter doesn't begin with rumors or emotions. It begins with a test. And the moment that envelope was opened, everything changed in ways no one could control. No cameras, no witnesses, no second chances. According to the allegations, the most explosive moment in this entire story didn't happen on a red carpet or in a courtroom. It happened quietly, almost clinically, with paperwork, sealed packaging, and a level of tension that made the air feel heavier than usual. Here's the uncomfortable question. Why would a DNA test even be discussed if there was nothing to question? People close to the situation insist the idea didn't come from paranoia. It came from doubt. The kind of doubt that doesn't announce itself loudly, but lingers. The kind that grows when timelines don't line up cleanly, when private conversations raise more questions than answers. And once doubt exists, it demands proof. According to multiple secondhand accounts, the test was framed as reassurance, not accusation. A way to quiet the noise. A way to restore certainty where it had quietly eroded. But tests don't care about intentions. They only deliver outcomes. And sometimes, those outcomes don't match expectations. Think about the psychology of that moment. You're not bracing for a scandal. You're bracing for relief. You expect closure, validation, confirmation that the worry was misplaced, that everything will snap back into place. And then it doesn't. Sources claim the initial reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Long pauses. Rereading. A refusal to accept what the numbers suggested. Because when results challenge identity, the mind resists before the heart catches up. Here's a detail that keeps resurfacing. It wasn't the test itself that caused panic. It was who saw it. According to whispers, the circle of knowledge was supposed to be microscopic. 1 or 2 people at most. But secrets rarely stay contained when emotions are raw and trust is fractured. A look lasts too long. A question is asked too carefully. And suddenly, someone else knows there's something they're not supposed to know. Ask yourself this. If you discovered something that could redefine your children's future, would you tell the truth immediately? Or would you first try to control the damage? Because that's where the story tightens. Insiders claim discussions shifted fast. From this can't be right to what does this mean to who else knows. The focus moved away from biology and toward survival. Image. Containment. Strategy. And here's the part that raises eyebrows. The results, allegedly, didn't point to a random anomaly. They pointed in a direction that was deeply uncomfortable. Familiar. Close. A connection that, once considered, suddenly made past interactions look very different. That's when one name began hovering in the room. Not spoken. Not written, just understood. And once that possibility entered the conversation, the stakes changed completely. Because if the test was accurate, and that's still hotly disputed, then the story wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about exposure. And in the next chapter, that unspoken name becomes impossible to ignore. Because according to those watching closely, the Hollywood connection didn't appear out of nowhere. It had been there all along. Here's where the story takes a turn that makes people lean closer to the screen. Because once the idea of an unexpected paternity entered the room, it didn't drift toward a stranger. It didn't land on a mystery man from nowhere. According to the allegations, it circled someone already familiar. Someone whose presence had always been explained away as harmless, convenient, normal. That's what made it dangerous. Think about it. In elite circles, proximity is everything. People move in overlapping worlds where lines blur between professional, personal, and private. And when two worlds collide, royalty and Hollywood, the collision doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it looks like friendship, collaboration, support. But sometimes, insiders say, it's more complicated than that. Here's the contradiction that keeps resurfacing. Publicly, this individual was described as nothing more than a close associate, a trusted confidant, someone safe. Yet privately, sources claim the emotional closeness raised eyebrows long before any allegations surfaced. Lingering conversations, unusual access, a familiarity that didn't quite match the official story. Ask yourself this. How often do we ignore red flags simply because they're wrapped in fame? According to those who claim to have observed the dynamic, the relationship didn't suddenly appear during the alleged separation. It was already there, established, normalized, which meant that if boundaries shifted, they did so quietly, without triggering immediate suspicion. That's the part people struggle with. We're conditioned to expect scandals to look chaotic, messy, obvious. But the most destabilizing ones often unfold in plain sight, disguised as something else entirely. There's also irony here. Hollywood thrives on reinvention, on controlling narratives, on reshaping reality through carefully curated images. And when that instinct crosses into real life, it becomes difficult to separate truth from performance. Insiders claim that once the DNA discussion happened, past interactions were re-examined through a new lens. Moments that once seemed innocent suddenly felt loaded. Casual gestures felt calculated, and what had been dismissed as gossip took on a new weight. But here's the key detail. No one rushed to name names. Why? Because naming the wrong person would be catastrophic, and naming the right one would be even worse. Reputations, careers, entire legacies could collapse under the scrutiny. Silence became the safer option. For a while, because rumors don't stay contained. They leak. They mutate. They attract speculation like gravity. And the more nothing is said, the louder the whispers become. Audience question. If you were in that position, would you confront the truth directly, or would you hope it never sees daylight? According to the allegations, that question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Decisions were delayed, conversations postponed, and during that pause, something else happened. Someone outside the original circle started connecting dots. And once that happened, control began to slip. Because the most shocking part of this story isn't who the rumors point to. It's who allegedly knew and said nothing. And what they decided to do next would push this story past the point of no return. So here we are, at the edge of a story that may never fully resolve itself. Because when allegations collide with power, fame, and carefully built narratives, the truth doesn't always emerge cleanly. Sometimes it fractures. Sometimes it disappears behind legal language, strategic silence, and competing versions of reality. Let's return to the question we open with. What if the story you were told was incomplete? Not necessarily false. Not necessarily true. Just edited. According to these allegations, what unfolded wasn't a single shocking moment, but a chain reaction. A quiet separation no one acknowledged. Doubt that lingered too long to ignore. A DNA test meant to reassure that instead destabilized everything. And a Hollywood connection that, once considered, made the past impossible to view the same way again. But here's the twist that often gets overlooked. Even if none of this is ever proven, the damage doesn't require confirmation. Suspicion alone reshapes relationships. Silence alone fuels belief. And the longer questions go unanswered, the more people fill in the gaps themselves. Think about the children at the center of this. Their identities aren't just biological. They're symbolic. They carry meanings projected onto them by institutions, supporters, critics, and the public at large. And when identity becomes a battleground, the truth becomes less about facts and more about who controls the story. That may be the real scandal here. Not DNA, not timelines, not names, but narrative power. Who gets to decide what's acknowledged and what's erased? Who gets to label something conspiracy instead of question? And how much truth can be withheld before silence becomes its own form of admission? Ask yourself this honestly. If everything was completely settled, why does this story keep resurfacing? Why do denials feel rehearsed instead of definitive? Why do new voices keep emerging years later, each adding a fragment that doesn't quite fit the official picture? None of this proves anything on its own, but together it creates discomfort. And discomfort is where stories like this live. Because in the end, this may not be about proving who is right or wrong. It may be about understanding how fragile public truth really is when it's filtered through fame, loyalty, and fear of fallout. And one final thought before we end. Every major scandal you've ever watched unfold had one thing in common. Before it broke, people whispered. Before it was confirmed, it was denied. And before the truth became unavoidable, someone somewhere tried very hard to keep it quiet. So the real question isn't whether this story is finished. It's whether we're watching the beginning or the calm before something much bigger. If you believe the truth always finds its way out, let me know. If you think power decides what survives, I want to hear that too. Because if even part of these allegations turn out to matter, this story isn't over. It's just waiting.